Welcome to today's Explainer. Go ahead and step right into my virtual classroom because today we're unpacking something incredibly powerful. We are going to examine the deep psychological scars of South African apartheid, and we'll be doing it through the absolutely brilliant, piercing literature of Nadine Gordimer. So, if you've ever wondered how an oppressive political system can just completely rewire a person's sense of self, well, you are definitely in the right place. Here is our syllabus for today. First, the apartheid setting. Second, post-colonial identity definitions. Third, praise as the forced mimic. Fourth, Jake as the ambivalent hybrid. Fifth, the failure of assimilation. And finally, agency versus displacement. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the apartheid setting. So, Nadine Gordimer, she was born in 1923 and actually grew up in a community that widely accepted the system of racial segregation known as apartheid. But she watched closely. She saw the white minority systematically strip away the rights of the black majority, and she absolutely refused to accommodate that brutal system. In fact, her refusal was so potent that the South African government repeatedly banned her books. They were literally afraid of the power of her words. You see, she used her literature as a weapon and a witness, focusing intensely on the moral and psychological tensions of living in a racially divided country. Her stories aren't just about politics, They highlight how an oppressive system inherently shatters a person's inner identity, leaving them in a state of profound alienation. Section 2, Post-colonial identity definitions. Okay, to really understand our characters today, we need to open up our post-colonial toolkit. And the first concept is hybridity. Think of this as the complete rejection of fixed, rigid identities. The theorist Homi Bhabha argues that in the contact zone, right where the colonizer and colonized meet, these new, fluid, transcultural forms emerge. It's this fascinating theoretical space where mixing cultures can actually subvert and challenge the dominant colonial narrative. It essentially offers a way for the oppressed to actually find a voice. Next up is mimicry. This happens when the colonized adopt the language, the clothes, and the behavior of their oppressors. But what's absolutely crucial to grasp here is that colonial mimicry often stems from the colonizer's own desire for a recognizable other. They want someone who is almost the same, but not quite. For the colonized person, this imitation is sometimes forced upon them just to rebuild their identity, and occasionally it's chosen out of an ingrained, really tragic sense of inferiority. And that leads us perfectly into our third concept, ambivalence. Because of this mimicry, the colonized person never wholly opposes the colonizer, which results in just immense inner turmoil. It's a psychological state of dual consciousness. Imagine feeling this complex, agonizing mix of both intense attraction to and utter repulsion toward the exact culture that is oppressing you. This tension right here, this is where Gordimer's characters truly live and breathe. Section 3. Praise, the forced mimic. Let's meet Praise from the short story Not for Publication. He's this really promising young street boy who gets discovered by a well-meaning but fundamentally oppressive British woman named Miss Adelaide Graham-Grigg. She essentially decides that Praise is the perfect candidate to be molded into her very specific vision of a future tribal leader. And in this process, Praise is culturally hijacked. His own identity is just erased. It's overwritten by his white benefactor, who forces him onto this incredibly rigid, predetermined path of colonial mimicry. She literally educates him to eventually become the country's prime minister. But what is so tragically ironic here is what Praise actually desired. He didn't want to be some prime minister molded by white ideals. No, he wanted to belong to the street gangs. He craved the rebellious, authentic freedom of the boys who stole money from white people's pockets and played their penny whistles when the police showed up. His true, authentic desire was totally disconnected from the so-called civilized life that was being forced onto him. Section 4. Jake, the ambivalent hybrid. Now, Jake Alexander, from the story Which New Era Would That Be?, presents a really fascinating contrast. He is a large, mixed-race printing shop owner. And unlike Praise, Jake has agency. He has his own money, he runs his own business, and he deliberately surrounds himself with a strange mix of friends, including white liberals. Yet, despite all this financial independence, his daily existence is an absolute masterclass in post-colonial ambivalence. He's constantly navigating a mixed-race reality that is just filled with deep internal contradictions. Just consider the intense psychological tension captured when Jake observes a white woman visiting his shop. He thinks, "She was beautiful," he supposed with disgust. Wow. Think about that for a second. He takes in her dramatic makeup, her black hair, her wide skirt.
He is physically attracted to her, and yet he is utterly repulsed by her underlying position as a colonizer who just assumes she's on his level. It is the perfect embodiment of ambivalence, that agonizing push and pull of desire and resentment.
So the really crucial point here is this structured contrast between the two men. Praise is trapped in a forced identity, right? He's groomed by his oppressor to imitate a colonial political ideal. Conversely, Jake attempts to assert a chosen identity, leveraging his financial independence to navigate a hybrid existence. But as we just saw with Jake's disgust, even a chosen hybridity carries an incredibly heavy psychological burden.
Section 5. The failure of assimilation. Let's think about how the very clothing and behavior these characters adopt inevitably lead to their alienation. Take the workers in Jake's shop. They wear the ill-matched, cast-off clothing of white people, which, only reinforces their perpetual feeling of subservience and inferiority. Then look at Philip from the story Through Time and Distance. He wears the exact same clothes as his white boss and drives the white man's car. But what's the outcome? He gets accused of collaborating and is completely alienated from his peers. And of course, Praise, who is educated to be a prime minister in the white man's image, ends up totally disconnected from his true desires and agency.
The big takeaway here is profound. Assimilation completely fails. Mimicking the colonizer, whether that's wearing the literal cast-off clothing of white society or being forced into their educational molds, it never brings true acceptance. It only reinforces the tragic displacement of the colonized, exposing the lie of cultural supremacy. Basically, you cannot imitate your way out of oppression. Section 6. Agency versus perpetual displacement. While hybridity theoretically offers a voice and a third space to exist, Gordimer's characters often find themselves lost in perpetual displacement. Take the nameless assassin in her story Homage. He flees his country, he's given fake papers, and he literally says, "I am nobody." Because he cannot successfully navigate a hybrid identity, he is doomed to a life of wandering and non-belonging. He's completely unmoored from his roots, with his identity entirely erased by the systems of power around him. Okay, before the wrap-up, let's quickly review our core study guide for today's lesson. Remember Baba's triad. We've got hybridity, that fluid, transcultural third space; mimicry, imitating the colonizer, which breeds psychological uncertainty; and ambivalence, that agonizing tension of attraction and repulsion. We see all of this lived out in Praise, who represents the tragedy of a forced, mimicked identity, and in Jake, who bears the heavy psychological burden of a chosen, yet highly ambivalent hybridity. Ultimately, as students of literature and history, we have to view these character arcs not just as brilliant fiction, but as intense, personal narratives of a real cultural conflict. Nadine Gordimer is showing us the profound inner turmoil of a racially divided country. It was a crucible that fractured millions of identities, leaving behind a legacy of psychological tension between colonizer and colonized that, quite frankly, is still felt today. I want to leave you all with this final, lingering question to ponder. Can a true sense of self ever be forged in a crucible where the only mold available belongs to your oppressor? I really invite you to deeply reflect on whether true agency can ever be built in the shadow of a colonizer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating texts with you next time.